Snow sifted down on Winterfell, a slow drift of ash white that muffled the clank of armor and turned the outer ward into a dim, breathing thing. Torches hissed with the wet, 1,000 tiny serpents. Jon walked the battlements with Ghost at his heel, the direwolf's breath pluming and dissolving in the cold. Beyond the walls the world had no edge, only a gray that swallowed the treeline and flattened the far ridges into a single dark smear. Even the stars had gone to ground. He paused where the stone knuckled outward, a stunted turret overlooking the east. The snow had crusted in the crenels. Beneath his glove the rock felt like the back of a frozen hand. Ghost pressed against his knee, silent, red eyes flicking to the gatehouse where men moved like shades behind arrow slits. The wolves did not show fear as men did. When they grew quiet, it was only because their listening had sharpened. "You mean to make me a liar?" Jon said softly to the weir of gray. "You mean to make me promise them they'll live and then send them to the dark anyway?" The wind answered with a slow, careful breath between the stones. Somewhere on the inner ward a hammer pealed. The smithies had worked without sleep for days. Dragonglass blades, arrowheads, the tricks of men who had learned to fear silence. Footsteps scuffed behind him. Ed Tollett came up with his shoulders hunched high, snow powdered across his beard. "The fires at the forward trench are primed," he said. "Melisandre, that red woman, she says she'll light them. If praying is lighting, then I've lit a good many candles to cold gods with me own breath." Jon's smile was thin. "She'll light them," spoken like a man who's seen her turn daylight tonight. "I'll settle for anything that makes White Walkers shy." Ed slapped his gloved hands together. "Sam wanted to see you if you've a moment before you go find the Dragon Queen. He's in the inner keep. Looks like a man about to ask the wall for his old job back. Gods help him." Jon nodded. They stood for a beat longer, listening to the snow. The wall was a memory carved into his bones. A cold so honest you could lean on it. This cold was quieter, reached for you with soft fingers. "Stay close to the line," he told Ed, "and keep the lads' feet moving. If they stop, they'll fall asleep standing." Now there's a comfort. Ed tilted his head, trying to catch Jon's eye. "We used to say it on the wall. When you're frightened senseless, fear is a good friend. Keeps your legs from locking and your jaw from running. You're frightened? Yes. Good." Ed's tongue pressed into his cheek as if testing a cracked tooth. "Then I'll be off, Captain." The title was a joke they told each other when fear made them clumsy. "If any of us last the night, I'll buy you a drink out of a cup not carved from bone." Jon clasped his forearm and moved on, leaving the battlements for the warmth of the inner way. Warmth was a lie. The hallways breathed a gentler cold, but it was cold all the same, baked into the stones. Old Winterfell seemed to flex around him, the bones of a long-dead beast stiffening for one last fight. He passed a pair of squat figures, Tyrion Lannister and Ser Davos Seaworth, arguing without pain, their voices kept low so the words would not snap in the brittle air. "When one has exhausted reason," Tyrion was saying, "one must turn to wine. Alas, it is also exhausted. You start the night drunk, you end it dead," Davos said. "And that's if you're lucky. Save what's left. If we live, you can drink yourself idiot for a week." Jon nodded to them both and pushed into the keep's belly. A corridor of black timbers and painted shields gave way to the dim lantern light of the room Sam had taken over from a bored steward. Books stacked like fortifications, table groaning with rolls of vellum and a scatter of dragonglass knives. Samwell Tarly had never looked thinner or more determined, his cheeks flushed raw with cold and worry. He held himself like a person who had forgotten how to sit. "I know you're busy," Sam said, and the words tumbled. He rescued a parchment from slipping off the table and added, "I wanted to show you something in case. Well, in case. In case there's no second telling," Jon said. Sam swallowed, breathed out, and pointed with the tip of a knife. "Valyrian steel, yes. Dragonglass, yes. You know this, but there's something else. I was reading the oldest accounts I could find. Not the Maester's tidy treatises, which are mostly guesses, but the old stuff. Half the words are prayers and half are recipes. but there's a thread in them. The children sang to the heart trees to awaken the cold, then tried to sing the cold into sleeping again when it bit their own fingers. Jon waited. Sam went on. Bran says the Night King will come to him. That much is certain. But there's mention, faded, faint, of a binding. The Leaf Whisperers wrote that the one made to be the other's king is not only master but also thrall. He was given a name with a sharp edge and a command that doesn't dull. It might be that what he commands, he is also tethered by. When the founder dies, the foundation shakes. I think if he falls, all he has raised falls with him. Jon had believed that already, in his blood more than his mind, but it steadied him to hear Sam say it. Then he must be met, Jon said. Sam's eyes sought his and held. You're thinking of him as a man. Be careful, Jon. He's a storm-wearing skin. He killed a dragon. He walked through dragonfire. I don't mean to beat him with fire. Jon reached for the knife and felt the dragon glass bite against his glove. The stone's black was not quite black, the way a raven's feather is all shades if you stand close and turn it. I mean to beat him with something he remembers. Iron and will. Longclaw, Sam said softly. Jon nodded, tucked the knife into his belt, and for a moment he was with his father upon the windy court where they had sparred with wooden swords, the tap of stick on stick shaping his bones. Ned Stark's hand had been heavy on his shoulder, grave voice in his ear. When you must, strike hard and true, but know why you are striking. In the gods would the snow fell straighter, a soft veil that seemed to hang from the red branches themselves. The weirwood faces were old in the bark and older in what watched through them. Bran sat under the heart tree's bleeding leaves with a stillness that was more than still. His eyes were the color of the sky before dawn. Theon Greyjoy paced a thin track in the snow 10 yards away, shortened spear in his hand, shoulders hunched in a posture that wanted to be a bow. You came, Bran said, as if Jon had completed a circle. You knew I would. Bran's gaze felt as if it touched a dozen places at once. I know you. I know the Night King. He will come. And if he does, Theon said, tightening his grip, he'll find us waiting. Jon looked at Theon. The man's face had lines it had not worn as a boy, and behind his eyes a deep tide moved, regret washing ashore and pulling back again and again. The boy he had been was a ghost walking beside him, and the ghost had no shadow. You have a claim to this place, Jon said. You've paid it dear. Theon's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. If you say so, Stark. He spat out the name as if it burned, then shook his head slightly. I'll keep the gods wood. I'll be back, Jon said. He rested a hand on Bran's shoulder. It was like touching a quiet stream. If he comes and I'm not here, wait one breath longer than you think you can. Bran nodded, and Jon turned away from the red tree. He found Daenerys Targaryen in the old great hall with her cloak thrown back from her shoulders and her braid coiled with frost. The fire in the hearth struggled to insist upon itself. Her hair captured what light there was as surely as silver catches the eye. The Dragon Queen stood over a rough map scratched into the table with charcoal, pebbles and carved ivory markers marking out the trenches, the lines of foot, the cavalry drawn back now after hours of debate. Grey Worm watched from the far side, still as a blade. Tyrion stood nearby, arms folded, lips pursed. She looked up when Jon came in, and her face softened without losing its iron. Is it time? She asked. Almost, Jon said. The word rested on his tongue like a pebble. How many times are we to do this? Tyrion murmured. I have plotted so many battles in my head that reality seems an insult. Reality has a way of not caring what we plan, Davos said from the shadow of a column. You get to be clever once, twice if the gods are drunk. After that, it comes down to who tires last. Daenerys dismissed them with a small nod. When the hall had thinned, she breathed and frowned slightly, studying Jon's face as if the snow clinging to his hood spoke a language she could read. They follow you, she said. They look toward you even when you are looking away. They follow you, Jon countered. They follow you because you rode north when you didn't have to, because you brought fire. I brought death as well, she said. There was no flinch in it. I have done what I had to do, what I chose to do. Did I choose right, Jon? He thought of all the choices that piled like bones under the feet of kings and queens. He thought of the truth Sam and Bran had told him, a truth that had lodged under his breastbone like an unpooled arrow. Aegon Targaryen. The name meant less to him than the wind, but the wound it made in the present, he felt that keenly. He had spoken the truth to her in the crypts, the one place he had promised himself never to put a lie, and the look that had passed over her face had been one he could not forget. Rage, fear, calculation, hurt. A quicksilver amalgam. You chose to fight for the living, he said. That is always right. She studied him and nodded, a curt little tilt, as if agreeing with a general who brought her unwelcome tidings she intended to argue with tomorrow. This night will tell us what kind of world there will be to rule, she said. If there is a world. She stepped closer, laid her palm on his chest briefly, feeling the hammer of his heart. Come back. I'm hard to kill, he said, and she almost smiled, then sobered. You were dead once, she said, and the word hung like frost. Once, he answered. There was no arguing with it. He took her hand and squeezed it, and then he was moving again, out into the white breath of the night. The first sign came in the way the horses rolled their eyes. Ghosts' hackles rose and stayed. The snow stopped falling all at once, leaving the world suspended. The air grew emptier, a hollowness that had nothing to do with cold. From the dark beyond the trench came a sound like dry leaves being dragged over stone. The whites pressed out of the gray, not a line but an advancing tide, as if the land itself had learned to walk. Melisandre stood alone before the trench with her red hair unbound, whispering words to a god that burned. For a heartbeat, nothing answered. The dead came on without hurry, a quiet certainty. Then the trenches leapt with fire, an orange scrawl across Winterfell's front that jerked into brightness and held. For a moment the flames became a bright river, and in that unnatural day the army of the dead seemed to hesitate, measuring heat against their master's command. They came anyway. Arrows flew, knives honed on curses, spears lifted and stabbed and lifted again. The Unsullied fought like the narrow parts of a machine, fitting into one another. The northern lines moved with a stubborn rhythm. Axe, shield, heel. Men died and rose and died again. The Dothraki had already failed the night. Flickers of flaming Iraq swallowed by distance one by one like stars. Jorah Mormont's voice had gone hoarse, and still he swung his sword, and Lyanna Mormont, small in her heavy armor, cast her lines of commands like a young general born cruel by necessity. Jon's breath froze inside his nose and throat as he moved along the inner line. A man in two worlds. The command he had been given and the fight he could not look away from. Above, the dragons tore holes in the cloud and seam in the snowstorm, Drogon's black shape cutting a slash across the night. Rhaegal a smaller, tighter darting thing. Fire rained in bellowing torrents and was torn away again by wind and frost. Jon had never felt more keenly the truth that the living are many hands trying to do one thing while death is one mind and 1,000 hands. When the pressure at the left gate turned from urgent to desperate, Jon swung up into the saddle they had kept for him and ran for the inner court where Rhaegal lurked, massive and coiled, breath steaming like an ironworks. The dragon's eyes found him and narrowed, and the air around Jon picked up into a whirl. He put a hand on the beast's neck, feeling heat and muscle and the raw, terrible life of the thing. He had ridden before with fear and wonder sharing his bones. Now he rode with purpose so clean it was almost a bomb. The dragon surged up, talons digging, wings beating the world into submission. From the air the field made a kind of sense. It was a living map of need and danger. The left buckled, the right burned, the middle held because the dead were trying to squeeze themselves through a fire they could not understand. Drogon roared through the haze and fire took a swathe of whites, and they burned without sound and without smell, burned as snow burns, vanishing. The ice wind came like a thrown spear. Jon felt Rhaegal's body jolt as if a giant had struck him with a hammer. The dragon shrieked, a high, wounded note, and Jon's stomach turned as the world flung itself sideways. He saw, impossibly clear, the Night King standing on a ridge of broken ice beyond the trenches. One blue-white hand still outstretched, the other at his side, his face absent of everything humans could put a name to. The king's cloak moved slightly in a wind that cared for no fires. The idea came to Jon as cleanly as if it had been spoken. He was being called down. Regal struggled and caught wind again, carrying Jon low over the battlements, dropping him in a skid of snow and broken slate. The dragon's wing hung askew, membranes torn. Jon staggered, found his feet, and when he looked again for the ridge where the Night King had stood, he was gone. In his chest, the decision flowered like a wound.
Open combat.
He did not run to the densest crush but along its edge, moving toward the Godswood. Ghost flew beside him like a piece of night torn loose. A wight had once tried to tear the wolf apart and had gotten Ghost's ear for the effort. Tonight the wolf sailed the white ground with breath coming hard, as if every leap were also a bite taken out of fear. Men shouted at Jon to stop, and men cleared his way, and men did not see him at all as the snow crowded in again, and he cut wights out of it like shapes from cloth. Longclaw sang in his hand, the song it had always been meant to sing. The Godswood had gone very quiet when he reached it. The torches here sputtered with stubborn life but seemed small blushes in the face of the still trees. Theon's men were dead or dying. Theon himself stood with his spear leveled, knees trembling, breathing like a man who had run very far to arrive too soon. Bran had not moved from beneath the heart tree, though snow had gathered on his cloak and his hair looked powdered with chalk. They arrived like frost growing. The Night King in the center, his retinue of walkers flowing with him, swords of out-thinned ice at their thighs. It was not a march, not exactly. They were simply here in more of them than anyone could account for a blink before. The torches dimmed and guttered, fighting against the new cold that came with them. Theon let out a sound like a laugh cut in two and charged, because that was what men did when there was nothing else to do. The spear struck true. The Night King batted it away with 2 fingers as if dismissing a fly. The next heartbeat found Theon on his knees, the king's blade through him. The blade withdrew without ceremony. Theon folded to the ground as if the snow had asked politely. Jon stepped into the clearing and the Night King turned toward him. Somewhere behind Jon, someone cried his name, and the cry had everything human in it. Horror, hope, love, rage. The cry died before it reached the white figure in the center. The walkers stilled and parted slightly, making space without stepping away. They formed a kind of wall that an army could not pass but a duel could. The old gods watched from the red leaves, and the heart tree's face ran its long tears of sap. Jon lifted Longclaw. He did not speak. Words felt too much like smoke tonight. He showed the Night King the sword's black ripples, the way light held in it. The king slid his ice sword from its sheath. The blade hissed as it came free, and as it moved the air itself seemed to fracture. He did not smile, but some impression of humor folded at the edges of him. He stepped forward and the world narrowed. Jon moved first because he knew he must. He went in hard, a straight cut that a man would have had to answer at once. The Night King watched it come as if he were watching a hawk cross a field, and angled a parry that did not quite touch Longclaw but made it feel touched. The sword juddered in Jon's hand with a cold on the brink of pain. He turned the cut into a feint, rolled his wrist, and came in on the king's flank. Fast, faster than he had ever been. Ned's voice in him and Qhorin half-hand overlaid. The blade is a question. Ask a better one. The king's answer was simple negation. He denied the blade, denied the man swinging it. Jon's third cut, a backhand meant to take the king at the neck, met the ice sword and threw sparks that weren't sparks. The cold that leapt into Jon's arm made his fingers go numb under the glove. He pulled back, breath frosting the air, and the world came to him in pieces. The sound of the king's blade moving, the winter quiet of the dead, Bran's breathing, Ghost's growl a low, steady thing like a half-remembered song. He changed angles, stepped through, let the training that lived in his muscles decide for him. He felt the ground under the snow, felt small rises and dips with the feet that had chased his brother across these same stones when they had been children and there had been no threat in winter but winter. He drew the king's blade down, locked it for a heartbeat, kicked at the king's knee. The armor joint took the blow like iron takes rain. The Night King flowed past him, and Jon felt the edge of the ice blade pass so close to his face that his eyelid crisped and cooled. When he was little, he had learned to breathe while running on the wall's top. Not gasping, not hoarding, but feeding the machine. He did it now. He breathed in everything, the cold and the terror and the old tree's presence, and he let it drive his arms. The king came on, not hurrying, and Jon understood that his speed did not matter. The thing in front of him did not measure speed that way. It measured hunger and intention. The fourth exchange was different. When Longclaw met the ice blade, the black steel sang a truer note. The ripple along its spine brightened, and a thread of blue-white frost laced itself along the fuller and did not bite. Jon felt a prickling along his palm, a warning and a promise. The Night King's head tilted. He had noticed too. The walkers circled, slightly, not an encirclement but a tightening of attention. Jon heard running feet in the snow beyond the trees and heard them stop short as if a net had been thrown across their ankles. He did not look. He could not. He pressed, feinting high, cutting low, searching for any part of the king that would allow mistake. He found none. Each movement was as inevitable as an eclipse. When the king cut across at Jon's hands, Jon lifted and slid and felt the ice kiss the leather and split it. He dropped Longclaw with the left and caught it with the right, the grip a stranger and old friend at once. He had taught men to fight left-handed when they broke wrists in falls. He had kept it in his bones. He gave ground to turn the king's line into overreach, found nothing to exploit, and so he changed, not because he could find a hole but because men must change or die. He let the duel grow ugly. There is a way of fighting that is poetry and a way that is accounting, and then there is the way where you remember you want to live. Jon let his boot heel find a root and used it to jerk himself forward, shoulder slamming where a shoulder might have been if the Night King had been a man. He met ice, and the shock went through him into his teeth. He let it go. He threw snow. He kicked snow. He moved sideways, stepping into the warmth of one of the guttering torches, taking the small burn on his calf and making it part of his skin. The king's blade cut through the torch in passing, and the top fell and hissed out in slush, smoke rising. He needed one true thing. One. Behind him Bran's voice came, not loud, not quiet, within him as much as on the air. Remember. He did not see the memory so much as move inside it. A cold morning, the yard before the armory. Ned Stark's hands on his shoulders, setting his stance. The point of a sword is a truth, his father had said, and the breath of it had become a cloud that drifted toward the stables and was absorbed. But truth without patience is a lie told quickly. The Night King cut and Jon dropped to his knee, letting the ice pass over his head. He drove Longclaw forward, not to kill but to mark, to state a thing. The black steel met the king's cuirass and skittered, drawing a line of pale across it like a chalk mark on slate. There. Jon felt the place sing in his bones. He stepped away, slowly, with deliberation, as if leaving a conversation at a hearth. The king came, inexorable. Jon reached down and pulled from his belt the little dragonglass knife Sam had pressed on him. He showed it openly. The king looked at it and did not react. Jon sheathed it again. His hands told the old story of distraction while his feet wrote a new one. He let the king read his hands and then showed him something else. He dropped Longclaw onto the snow. Gasps came from the edge of the godswood. Jon ignored them. The Night King did not rush. He came on, unfold, ice blade lifting for the cut that would take the man in the chest and still his machine. Jon's empty hands moved the way hands move when a blade is about to enter them. He stepped into the cut, into the moment before it becomes two moments. The ice came, and Jon turned his shoulder, the steel of his pauldron taking the first kiss with a crack like a breaking lake. His right hand moved in, not for the ice but for the mark he had made. He closed his fist on one of the heart tree's low, twisted roots where it broke the snow, wrenching it upward with a grunt. The root gave with a wet rip, pale wood exposed where bark had burned away earlier when men had brought torches too close. He had seen, in the red wax of the tree's tears, Tiny glittering plates, the pale flakes of sap frozen into sharpness. They bit his palm as if grateful. He swung the root like a club and slammed it into the chalk line on the Night King's chest. The sound was not a sound. It was absence. The ice armor caved. Slivers burst outward as if a blue shell had hatched itself in reverse. The king's body rocked back a fraction. Jon did not wait. He was already moving, the motion of dropping the root opening the meat of the world long enough for his left hand to do what his right had made possible. He had not sheathed Longclaw far. It lay in the snow like a thing fallen from the sky. His hand closed around its grip once more, and the sword came up, black and singing. He put it through the Night King where the crack had opened, not with a great shout, not with a cry for gods or houses or love. He put it through with a breath and a letting go. The blade bit, kept biting. The hilt struck ice with a ringing thunk, and Jon felt the vibration run up his arm and into his chest. The king's mouth opened. A thin trace of cold curled out as if something inside him were trying to try the air for the first time and finding it too warm. Then he shattered. He did not fall and then break. He became a decision, here whole, then not. Ice flew outward in a rush that stung Jon's face and stripped the snow under his boots. The shock of it pushed him back a pace and a half, and all the torches went out at once. For a heartbeat, the godswood had no light at all. Then the moon cut through a tear in the clouds and fell upon the heart tree as if the gods had leaned down to see their work. The walkers went up like glass struck by a voice. They broke into 1,000 knives, and then there were only knives melting, leaving dark shapes in the snow as if men had stood there for years and had finally remembered how to lie down. From beyond the trees came a sound like grain collapsing under the last shovel. The dead army, robbed of command, passing from doing into being. Bodies fell. Arrows fallen also fell anew as the hands that had held them no longer did. The wind remembered itself and worried at the castle's banners. Somewhere, someone laughed in a voice that couldn't decide if it were a cry. Jon stood with his head bowed, his breath coming hard. Ghost bumped him with a hard, insistent nose. The wolf's body shook once, a clumsy dance of relief no less sincere for being ungainly. Jon put his hand in the thick fur and then turned. Theon lay on his side, looking up. The snow was quiet around him. He had not bled much. The king's blade had frozen the wound in as well as out. His mouth moved without sound for a moment, trying to form a word he had spent years not deserving. "You're home," Jon said, kneeling, and Theon let out a breath that chattered. "Tell your sister," Theon said, and closed his eyes. Bran watched, the years layered in his gaze like rings in the weirwood itself. "Thank you," he told Theon's stillness, as if chalking a tally on a ledger that had not allowed thank yous for a very long time. Then he lifted his eyes and settled them on Jon with a weight that recognized without praising. "He was tied to the beginning," Bran said. "You cut the rope. Are we finished?" Jon asked, and the question escaped him raw. He meant the battle. He meant the long, terrible wave that had rolled and rolled and rolled until it seemed to fill time as well as land. "For this," Bran said, "the night is not done. Our nights never are." They moved from the godswood as if the snow had grown stiff with sudden sunlight, though the sunlight was only promise. The sky lightened at the edges. Fires were being coaxed back into life along the battlements now that a certain fear had walked off and been broken underfoot. Distant shouts collapsed into sobs and laughter and the odd, jarring cheer like a single bell rung where a church still stood in a fallen city. On the field, they found the living waking from a dream of deadness. Men pulled their friends from under drifts of bodies, yanked dragonglass free of ribs that no longer objected. The living had to count themselves again. They did so greedily and clumsily. Davos limped more heavily than he had when the night began. The bones of his face set in an expression that mistook itself for a frown and was only exhaustion. He saw Jon and then saw what he had done. His mouth twitched into something that would have been a smile if it had had anything left to stand on. Melisandre stepped across the field, her red robe torn and blackened at the hem. She did not look surprised. She did not look as if she had expected the night to go otherwise. She moved as if fulfilling a design that had been drawn on a map she carried in her palm. She paused once beside the ragged circle of burned earth where a giant had died with a little girl in his chest. Her lips moved. Later, they found her cloak folded neatly on the ground near the field's edge. And in the snow beyond, prints fading into nothing. Daenerys came down from Drogon in a tumble of grace and ferocity. Her hair a mess, face smeared with ash that made her look like a painted warrior. Jorah Mormont leaned on his sword near her as if it were a third leg he had finally learned he must use. Blood darkened the wolf of his sleeve. When she saw Jon, she stopped, and all the muscle in her body set itself. "You," she said, and the word hung between them like a rope too tight to look at closely. "You did it." Jon nodded. He did not trust his voice for a heartbeat. He had believed this moment would crack something inside him and leave him leaking. Instead, he felt full in a way that frightened him more. Not with pride, not exactly. As if a great, hollow thing had been filled and he was waiting to see if it would hold. Daenerys stepped closer and took his face in both hands, the calluses on her palms scratching his beard. She kissed him as if they were alone in a room with walls and a door that shut. He did not think, and thinking would not have helped anyway. He let it be simple, two warm bodies in a world that had remembered warmth. When she broke away, there was brightness in her eyes that had nothing to do with the cold. "They will sing," she said, and her voice had the old Daenerys in it, the girl who had been given as a gift and grown teeth of her own. "They will decide what to call you. I can do without their songs and their names. I want you breathing." "I am breathing," he murmured. "And you? I have breath enough for two." Her gaze flicked beyond him, and the light changed in it. "We have much to do. The living world is not simpler than the dead." Sansa's embrace came later, after the counting of the living and the naming of the dead began, after Arya stood with no expression beside a man who had made her a heavy hammer and looked as if the hammer had broken him instead, after Brienne sat down on a step and did not get up because it hurt less to sit than to stand. Sansa came to Jon where he stood with Ghost at his side and took him in her arms without ceremony, without the careful measuring that had lately sewed itself into every one of her movements when there were eyes on her. She held him as if he were her brother, and the world had not complicated that word. "You came back," she murmured in his ear. "You always come back." When she pulled back, her eyes were clear and cut like winter sky. "They will love you for this," she said. "They already did. Now they will trip over each other to prove it. I didn't do it to be loved." "I know," she said. "That's why they'll do it all the more." Tyrion limped to them, looking around with the shock of a man who had asked for one miracle and been given half a dozen by accident. "Shall we have a feast?" he asked. "We have little to eat and less to drink. It seems the perfect time for celebration." "Wine finds a way," Davos said, passing with an armful of blankets. "So do mouths." They held the feast of a sort. It was a strange thing. Laughter catching and turning to weeping in the same throat. Pride slipping its leash and then sitting down again with obedient shame. Tormund boomed his voice so large it made the hall seem smaller. When it shook, he drank to hide the shake. He told anyone who would listen that Jon Snow had looked the Pale King in the face and split him like old driftwood. "He fought like the thunder," Tormund proclaimed. "He fought like the stories our fathers told our fathers. He fought like a man who'd already died once and wanted to see if he could do it better." Jon raised a cup he did not drink from and smiled the way a man does when he'd like to be in the yard with his thoughts and his wolf. Daenerys, up on the high dais because the room expected her there, did not smile. She watched the way men looked at Jon, and the brightness in her eyes had become something that glinted and did not warm. Tyrion watched her watching, and Varys, with indistinct eyes, watched them all. After a time, her face softened by a hair's breadth when she saw Jon drop his gaze and move down from the dais to pick up a fallen spoon for a boy who had no fingers and no mother any longer. The boy stared at him as if he had dropped stars in the rushes. Later, when the hall had dimmed and the cold crept back under the doors like smoke, she found him outside under the battered banners of House Stark, the direwolf torn and resown where the wind had had its way. They stood close. Old words and new truths lay between them like firewood not yet lit. "We will go south," Daenerys said. "We must. Cersei has a kingdom under her foot that she thinks is a stone. She has lied and lied until she thinks her lies are walls. She has the Golden Company," Jon said. "Euroness heaps. Scorpions. She will make use of men the way the Night King made use of the dead. It's a different cold, but it's cold." "I have dragons," Daenerys said. "I have men who've chosen to keep living. I have you." He looked at her. It was dark enough that he could see her not as a queen and not as a story, but as a woman whose skin took on the color of night when the moon's light failed. "You have me," he said, and meant it, and knew while he meant it that he was also thinking about the face in the heart tree, carved with sorrow, and about a name that did not fit his mouth. He felt both truths settle into him alongside each other like two wolves that had decided not to tear each other's throats for the moment. They rode south when the snow allowed it. Winterfell did not vanish behind them. It came along in their chests. The world changed by inches. Hills unrolled like crumpled blankets being smoothed. The air, still hard, softened its edges. On the road men sang less and talked more. The dead had been met and were gone. The living needed to remember how to say small things to one another. Weather and porridge, and whether this boot would take another resole. Rhaegal flew with Drogon and minded his wing, the torn membrane healing into a strong, scarred sail. Jon watched him with the same careful attention. He paid a sword that had cracked at the tang and been repaired by a smith he trusted. Drogon hunted as he had always hunted, with disdain for caution. Above them the clouds broke and patched. At Moat Cailin, Sansa turned north with a guard that clung to her like iron filings to a magnet. She stood with Jon in the road and held his hands in both of hers. "Bring me back a world," she said, and the Stark in her was clear, hard, and beautiful as ice that sings when a skater goes over it. "One we can live in, one where I can stand on these walls and count the sheep again. I'll bring you back what I can," he said. His smile wanted to be a grimace. "And you bring me back a winter that doesn't eat the crops." "I will," she said. She did not look at Daenerys when she rode away. Daenerys did not watch her go. Tyrion watched them both and thought without moving his lips. The army swelled as it moved. Country lords who had sent men north to die now sent themselves south to try to live. Some knelt to Daenerys and meant it. Some knelt to Jon and pretended they did not know it. Some knelt to no one and drifted at the edges like hungry dogs until Davos or Grey Worm found them a task that looked like a choice. Varys gathered whispers and kept them folded inside the girth of his robe. His silence thickened into something. At Dragonstone they stopped. The island had the feel of a place that had held its breath for a long time and had not quite remembered how to exhale. The sea bit at the rocks, and the castle's black bones rose out of the water like the ribs of a great drowned beast. Jon walked the long table room with its carved map, the carved rivers and hills under his fingertips. Daenerys ran a finger from the trident to King's Landing and back up again, as if drawing a thread she meant to knot. The ghosts here were older than the North's, and they smelled of salt and smoke. Missandei brought them news that tasted like grit. The Golden Company was marching. Qyburn had multiplied scorpions on every wall that mattered. Euron Greyjoy's ships drifted like a stain in Blackwater Bay. "Cersei will make us bleed on approach," Tyrion said. "She will make a song of our blood. If we show strength, she will harden. If we show mercy, she will take it as weakness and harden. Her only art is hardening." "We cannot not come," Jon said. "We cannot pretend the world is already new, or wait for it to become so by itself. We go, but we do not go like fools." Daenerys looked at him with heat and something blank. "Go on," she said. She did not don her crown when they planned. She had worn it on the march once, and men had seemed smaller to her when she did. "We do not go by sea," Jon said. He touched the Blackwater map and found all the points he did not know with his fingers. "We go by land and keep the dragons where they are strongest. Above, we make no days-long camps where we can be burned as easily as burn. We keep the host hungry for movement. We let her shoot at empty places and keep moving. We bleed a little at a time and none of it where she thinks we will be." "A siege, then," Tyrion said. without admitting it's a siege. We pull her into using all her tricks where they leave her nothing afterward. Her scorpions will hurt us, but not as they would if we tried the bay, Missandei added. Her voice was calm in a way that made men think they'd always known what she said. And inside the city, there are mouths that do not wish to starve for a lion. Varys inclined his head a fraction. There are mouths that think lions have forgotten how to feed them. It's a beginning. They moved. The march south was not like the march north had been. There was no single fear to braid 1,000 different fears into a rope. There were 100 small terrors, each with teeth. But there was a strange resolve born of having looked at the worst thing the world could make and found it breakable. The army came on like time. Cersei Lannister watched them come from her high window. Her hand rested on the sill as if feeling for a tremble in the stone. Her belly lay quiet. In the stories she would have clutched it and spoken to it. She was not presently in a story. She listened to Qyburn's careful, greedy counsel and sent the messenger away and listened to Euron Greyjoy's bragging and sent him to the sea. She stroked a finger along the arm of her chair. Her mouth set in a line she had carved with years of refusing to be the thing men wanted to use. She had decided what she was. She saw no reason to decide again. The host of the living ringed kings landing at a distance that stayed away from Scorpion Range but did not seem timid. It drew itself into 3 distinct tides. Jon took the northern flank where the roads fed in from the river. Grey Worm took the southern, where villages could be taken or left to rot on the vine. Daenerys stood at the center not because she loved symbolism, but because the dragon's shadows fell best from there across the city's heart. Tyrion went between, and Davos, and a small knot of men who had once argued different wars, now arguing a single one with themselves. The first week was made of dust and waiting and little cuts. Their archers worried the walls and drew fire from the scorpions, studying the angles like men hunting hawks. The dragons came in high, passing and turning and never cutting 2 claws. Twice bolts reached up and seemed to catch them, and men flinched as if they'd been struck themselves. Twice the shafts fell away, spent. Rhaegal's wing made a new sound when he turned. Jon learned it and learned not to hear it as a threat. At night fires burned in the out-villages like gossip. Refugees trickled out of the gates under flags that trembled more than waved. They came to the lines of the living and were fed because the living had not forgotten how. They did not all weep with relief. Their faces were complicated maps. On the 8th day Arya and the Hound came to Jon's tent without having been announced by any guard because no guard could announce what he never saw. Arya looked different here in the south than she had in the north. The air had warmed a hair, and she wore it the way she had once worn a boy's clothes, as an advantage she did not brag about. The Hound's scowl had not changed with the weather. "You mean to starve them," Arya said without greeting. "I mean to make them choose their queen," Jon said. "Food makes men decide faster than speeches." She studied him for a long moment. "You fought the Night King," she said. It was not a question. Men had told the story as if they were coins, and she had accepted each coin's face but not its weight. "Was he the worst thing you've ever seen?" "Yes." "Do you dream of him?" "Yes." "Good," she said, and there was a little winter smile in it that had no cruelty. "Then you understand how to look at the world. You came to talk about dreams?" The Hound growled. "No," she said. "I came to tell my brother that the gates at Pisswater Bend are old and the hinge on the postern has a crack as long as my thumb." She held up her hand and showed a small thumb as if to reassure everyone she wasn't being dramatic. "If you make a noise at the southern walls at midnight, the men there will move. At the bend, if 6 men go quiet, 8 can come out." "You found that out today?" Jon asked. "Last night," she said. "Tonight there will be more rats on the walls than men." They took the gate at Pisswater Bend not with an army but with a decision. Grey Worm's hand-picked moved as if a stitch had been pulled and the seam simply opened. Davos's men started a blaze in a line of empty barrels in the south, a very noticeable and unimportant piece of theater that pleased the city's watchers. On the north, Rhaegal and Drogon made a pass that gave the Scorpions a choice they wanted to make too much. Take those shots that might matter at last. While the city blinked, Arya's 8 men became 16 inside. They opened nothing large, not at first. They opened a way for food to come into a single block where hungry mothers with children had begun to barter hair for flour. Those women recognized a sack of grain faster than they recognized a flag. They told their screaming neighbors to quiet down. They organized a line. By dawn, a rumor ran through 3 wards. Someone fed us without asking for a lion's paw print. By noon, men began to gather in an empty square, not to speak of loyalty out loud, but to listen for it with their heads turned slightly. By nightfall, the Scorpions fired at shadows, and 2 crews were stoned by people they had been theoretically protecting. Cersei did not ignore this. She did what she had always done. She drove a wedge. She hanged 3 men from the gate they had opened and saw to it that they were hanged low enough that a mother lifting a child could kiss his bare feet and ask him not to be angry with her. She sent soldiers door to remind households that the lion's jaw could smile and bite at once. She sent Qyburn to the walls with a white flag and a face arranged into sorrow. "Her Grace wishes to talk," Qyburn called in his careful voice. "Her Grace wishes to choose a safe way to lose," Tyrion called back. "She won't find it." Qyburn sighed as if the world had let him down by being so world-like. "Some men stand longer than they can stand," he said, "because those around them prop them up. Sometimes it is merciful to remove the props." "Mercy is what brought us here," Tyrion said, "and fear, and 100 other things. We'll try to leave with one of them still in our pockets." The negotiation at the gate was less negotiation than it was a recital of endings. Cersei and Daenerys stood within earshot, but with enough distance between them that men could breathe. Qyburn spoke for Cersei as if he were a man who had learned to sing in a private language. Tyrion spoke for Daenerys as if he were translating not only Daenerys' words, but also the breath that lay under them. Jon stood to Daenerys' right, Longclaw at his side, a figure that made men straighten when they found their eyes on him and look away when he saw that they looked. "Lay down your arms," Tyrion said, because the old forms were comfortable, "and the Queen will be merciful." "Lay down yours," Qyburn said with the gentleness of a man explaining gravity to a child, "and the city will be spared." Daenerys' smile was a small knife. "The city is what I am trying to spare," she said. "You have mistaken the palace for the city." "Walls are walls," Qyburn said. "Theirs yours. Theirs are built of lies," she said. "Mine are not yet built." Afterward, when the flags had dipped and the formalities had exhausted themselves, Tyrion went to the foot of the gate alone and asked to speak to his sister. He did, and she stood above him with her hair drawn back and her eyes like wells he had fallen into and only just climbed out of. He begged her in a voice that frightened him with its sincerity. She smiled with a mouth that had learned how to break kindnesses back. They did not take the city in a single day. They took it in a way that let it live afterward. It was messier. It was harder. It was slower. It saved more. The Scorpions fired and fired. The dragons learned and learned. A week became 2. There were nights when men in the camps looked at the city's lights and thought they were stars and hated the sky for being close enough to mistake. There were days when the food lines inside grew ugly and had to be thinned with words. There were betrayals and bravery, and the 100 small infamies war collects and drops again, and no one marks the places where they fell. On the 19th day, a section of the outer wall came down with a roar like an argument that has learned it will never finish. It was not dragonfire. It was old mortar and older stone and the hammers of men who had found the places where time had already done the work. Through the breach poured men with shields on their arms and promises in their mouths and the names of their children and their dead balanced on their tongues like prayers. The fighting was street by street, and then it was room by room, and then it was stairs, always the stairs, and then it was a doorway and then another. Jon did not burn the city. He went into it with Longclaw and the oath he had told himself when he stood under the heart tree. He broke men who would not be bent, and he watched others throw down their blades and seize their chance to live. He took a cut along his thigh that would leave a line there he would trace years later when the snow of age decided to visit him after all. He killed 3 men who might have yielded if the world had arranged itself differently 10 heartbeats earlier. He would remember their faces more than the faces of the men who had looked at him, considered what they were, and put their swords down. He saw the Hound laughing as if someone had told him a joke that hurt, and Brienne holding a stairwell alone, and Davos carrying a child with his arms and 2 others with his voice. Daenerys flew above it all and did not rake the streets with fire. She marked scorpions and burned them. She marked a building where men had holed up and used the children inside as hard cover, and she burned the men in the windows and left the lower floor unlit. She found herself shaking at one point, high above, and realized she had been holding her breath. She let it go, and the breath unwound through her hands and into Drogon's spine. Her face looked young when she landed on a tower's toppled edge and watched the streets fill not with flames but with humans doing human things badly and well. Cersei retreated into the Red Keep. The world narrowed around her until the room she was in was the world. Ser Jaime Lannister did not find her. If he tried, the city had too many rooms and his heart too many doors. Euron died on a strip of beach cursing the tide for leaving as if it were his woman with her back turned. Qyburn went down in a stairwell, his neck broken under a falling stone that did not know what it crushed. The mountain finally had no orders left to hear and walked into a rain of arrows and did not come out again. Men spoke of it afterward as a story without beginning or moral. When Jon reached the doors to the throne room, his breath hurt in his chest and his sword hurt in his hand. The doors were open. Inside was quiet. The seat of all this blood stood beyond, ridiculous and beautiful in the way a thing made of greed and good intention can share a face. The great metal chair looked like a trap and a promise. On the floor of the hall, in the company of broken pillars and fallen banners, Cersei Lannister stood alone. Her hair lay across her shoulders. Her dress was torn. Her feet were bare. It had the feel of a mask someone had thrown together at the last moment. She held herself as she always had, as if her bones had made an armature for steel. "So," she said when Jon entered. Her mouth curled. "The northern bastard." He said, and the word made the room smaller in a way that felt entirely his. "You look like him," she said. "The man who loved honor more than he loved breathing. He begged me once. Do you know that? For your sister. He begged me and looked like he was swallowing his own heart." Jon felt old grief try to stand up and be counted. "It changed nothing," he said. "Everything changes something," she said. Then her posture altered. A small thing, as if she had remembered she was playing a part and decided to play it better. "Go on then. Take me. Throne rooms are for spectacle." "I didn't come for spectacle," he said. "You came because the dragon girl asked you to." Cersei's smile made a brittle sound in the air. "You do as women tell you. First your Stark mother, then your Snow mother, then this one with fire where her tears should be." He let it pass through him. "You'll stand trial," he said. "You'll be a queen who answers to the people she forgot were her people. Or you won't stand trial. I'm not your jailer." He gestured and Grey Worm stepped into the doorway as if he had been a shadow made briefly into a man. "Put her somewhere she can't harm a soul. Make sure she's fed." Cersei's laughter was sudden and odd. It bounced in the high space and came back thinner. "You think you are making a new world," she said. "You are only making my same world with a different picture hung over the hearth." "Maybe," Jon said, "but the picture will not have you in it." He turned away before she could make a dagger out of a word and throw it into his back. Outside, the hall breathed a new air. Dust and smoke and the heavy odor of men who had been held too tight by metal for too long. Daenerys stood at the far end of the corridor with Drogon's head lowered behind her like the awareness of night. Her eyes searched his face. He thought of snow melting on a spring field, the way it doesn't go by degrees but all at once if the sun looks at it long enough. "It's done," she said. "It's begun," he answered. They did not set Cersei to a pyre or a headsman. They put her in a tower that had once been used to store dried fish because it caught the wind. They fed her and gave her straw and words to wound herself with. She said very little. Varys sent a priest who brought no gods and then sent no one at all. Men in the city did not tear down the Red Keep. They set to mending it because they could not breathe ruins and live. The days that followed were troublesome and human. Food lines were reorganized. Grain stores were uncovered that someone had sealed and hidden. The man who had done it hoped to be called wise and was instead called a thief by everyone who did not owe him money. The Dothraki grew restless and then less restless as they found their way in a place where the grass did not hide enemies and their horses shied at ships. The Unsullied stood at corners where cornerstanding needed doing and looked like arguments against theft. The Northmen made rough jokes and rebuilt walls because the doing of it was a comfort. Missandei found a market weight that had been skewed to cheap buyers and set it right. Tyrion counted and counted. Davos taught boys to mend nets. Daenerys moved among the people with a stillness that surprised them. She listened to a woman talk about her husband as if the woman's husband were the center of every star in the sky. She watched a mason lay a stone the way a mother lays a fevered child back to bed after checking his breath. She missed her brother who had died before he became what he might have become, and she missed her brother who had died after he had become what he should never have become, and she missed herself in ways that were stranger than missing. When she looked up, she found Jon watching her the way a man watches a fire he has sat beside through a long night, with gratitude that refuses to forget pain. They spoke under a lantern on the second night in the small hour when the city exhaled. The moon had scoured the sky clean and the stars looked like pins in a black cloth. "They want you," she said without preface. "Your north wants you. The south wants you and is pretending it does not. They want food and walls," he said, "and not to be killed for someone's dream. Dreams build walls," she said.
Drams fills to roses.
"Dreams wake men before dawn. Dreams burn cities too," Jon said. She accepted it. "So we will watch the dream." She let out a breath that steamed in a tiny cloud. "Marry me," she said. The word hung and did not fall. He had thought it before she said it. He had pushed it away because there were too many words on either side of it that made it heavy. He stood with the old gods under his skin and the new world before his eyes and felt the hinge turn. "The North," he said, "will keep its name," she said, "and keep its faith, and keep the right to tell me I am wrong without losing its teeth, and keep its queen in the person of your sister if that makes the North sleep better in winter. I do not wish to be only queen of ashes or queen of southern stones. I wish to be queen of the living. They are stubborn. I will be stubborn with them." He found himself smiling at last, not with relief exactly, but with recognition. "You'll let them keep their snow and they'll let you keep your dragons. They are not mine to let," she said. "But yes." They wed without spectacles, for the city had no patience for splendor yet, and Winterfell would have thought a southern rite a farce. They spoke words before a heart tree anyway because the godswood in the Red Keep had stubbornly reasserted itself. A single sapling pressed up against a wall where workers swore they had sealed it with proper brick and backs. Bran had a hand in it, if he had a hand left in anything men understood. The tree's leaves were young and foolish and terribly brave. They shook when the wind instructed them to and otherwise watched the words men said. After, there were more days and then more. Men came to the throne and argued that it be made less sharp. Jon never sat it. He did not forbid it either. He seemed comfortable standing beside, so he stood. Daenerys sat sometimes because a queen must show the shape of queenliness and give people a place to put their eyes. Tyrion stood below with Davos and Missandei and Varys, and a rotating confederacy of stubborn men and clever women who had learned that the kingdom was not a thing given but a thing made daily with hands that got tired and backs that complained. Cersei lived long enough to see the city not fall. She watched cranes, wooden, not birds, lift stones she had thought would never be moved. She watched a child steal an apple from a cart and the cart owner laugh and pretend not to see and then tuck two more into the child's shirt when he came back and said he had found them. She listened to the bells ring for no reason other than that bells like to be rung. On a morning that tasted of rain, she did not open her eyes and did not draw breath. And the woman who brought her food set the bowl down gently and went and stood for a long time in a doorway because she could not think of what to do next. Jon dreamt less of the Night King as summer leaned its shoulder against the city. He dreamt instead of smaller terrors. A market falling into quarreling, a pact with a stubborn Lord Freying. They woke him. He got up. He put one foot down and then the other, and he and his queen did the dull work that keeps kingdoms from coming apart under the weight of their own names. In the north, Sansa wrote letters that had the measured, kind words that cause men to accuse a woman of ice while they carry out her policies. Brienne wore the white and wrote names in a book. Jaime's page had 2 hands worth of writing on it before she was done. Arya stayed long enough to grow suspicious of ceilings, and then left on a ship that looked too small to swim and too brave to sink. Bran went where only Bran could go and returned when he wanted to, and men stopped asking him to explain himself. Rhaegal's scar knitted itself into a music that did not impede him. Drogon annoyed craftsmen by basking on the warm stones where they wished to work, and Missandei learned which words to say to make him move without offending him. Ghost became a rumor in the Red Keep, moving through corridors that had learned to expect cats and finding that they were not prepared for something that looked like night with a heartbeat. He slept at the foot of the bed when Jon slept, and on the balcony when Jon rose, and sometimes in a sunny courtyard with one eye open because wolves do not trust sun. They went north before the first leaves thought about changing, and when they rode through the gates of Winterfell, the stones breathed a little. Stark men applauded and then embarrassed themselves and found ways to make it look like they had been just waving to friends across the yard. Sansa kissed Daenerys on both cheeks because she had learned that her mouth could be sharper than any steel and that she need not use it always. They walked to the Godswood. Jon laid his palm on the heart tree and felt it recognize him, felt the line that ran from that day under its branches to this one and beyond. Daenerys put her hand beside his, and when her skin touched the bark she felt a tickle that was not entirely the wind. She looked up and met the red-carved face, and it did not surrender anything to her and did not withhold it either. "I never thought I would love a tree," she said, and Jon laughed soft. "You grow north," he said, and she did not object. On a hill beyond the walls, they looked out over a world that had learned to be different. There were scars, and they were not ashamed of them. The space where the dead had come out of the trees looked like a low, thoughtful line across the land. The fields had new tracery where men had learned to dig trenches, as if the earth were an ally who needed invitation as much as order. Children ran in a stumble of limbs and shouts, daring each other to find the oldest bones and then screaming with laughter when what they found was a farmer's shoe half full of dirt. Sansa stood near them and watched and did not call them back. Jon found that when he closed his eyes he could still feel the moment Longclaw had gone through the Night King, the way the world had held its breath and then exhaled with him. It did not haunt him. It spoke to him in a language without words. You did a thing you had to do, and then you did the next thing. That is a life. That night, in the hall where the banners shook when the doors opened and let the outside in, Tormund told the tale again, as he would tell it all the winters of his life. He made Jon taller and the Night King taller still and the sword longer until Davos, mug in hand, leaned over and muttered, not quietly, "Careful, you'll have him swinging a ship's mast next." Tyrion laughed into his wine. "Let the tale grow," he said. "Men need bigness to see the shape of a story. The truth is not less under it." Jon listened and did not correct them. He sat with Daenerys and with Sansa and with men whose names would never be written and with women whose hands made futures whether they wanted to or not. When a serving girl spilled stew on the table and burst into tears, Daenerys reached without thinking and put a hand on her shoulder until the shake went out of her. When a boy came up to Jon and thrust under his nose a stick carved badly into a sword and asked him if this were what he had used to kill the Ice King, Jon took the stick with ceremony and said, "Aye, lad. But the trick is not the stick. The trick is the hand." "Whose hand?" the boy asked, suspicious of trickery. "Yours," Jon said. "Always yours." Late, when the hall thinned and the torches let out small sighs as if they had been kept too tight on their spits, Jon stepped outside and found the night less bite than kiss. Ghost slid out of the darkness with that sound wolves make that is not sound. The stars felt nearer. He leaned on the rail of the walkway and looked toward the Godswood and saw a shape in his mind that would always stand there. A pale figure with a blade of winter, the impossible thing that had felt Longclaw's weight and had come apart because the world had remembered how to break it. Daenerys came and stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. She did not talk for a time that could not be measured. They had both come to like that kind of time. When she spoke, it was as much to the air as to him. "You've always been ready to die," she said without accusation. "Yes," he said, "Be ready to live," she said. "I am," he answered, and found that he had not lied. They went down into the quiet of the keep. The stones kept their counsel. The night turned in its sleep and did not wake. Beyond the walls, the track of the living did not stop. In the morning there would be a lost sheep to find and a treaty to write and an argument over how many sacks of grain constituted a year's tax for a village that did not like to count. There would be a dragon sunning itself where it should not, and a wolf that had decided a lord's chair made excellent bedding, and a boy who wanted to hit something with a stick and be told he had done right. There would be memories that stung and memories that soothed and memories new as bread. Somewhere to the far north, beyond where maps grew bored, cold lay on the land like a name. It would never leave. No one asked it to. But here and now, the cold knew what had been done under red leaves and under gray sky, and it kept a respectful distance, as one power does when it meets another and finds itself out of reasons to press. And in the center of that truce stood a man who had picked up a sword when there was nothing else left to pick up, and a woman who had put down fire when it would have been easier to hold it tighter, and a city that learned to move without a lion on its back, and a north that remembered how to bake bread and to sing badly and well. Under a heart tree's quiet face, wind played in the red leaves. They whispered. If a man stood very still and had done enough to keep his mind honest, he might have heard what they said. The words were simple and beyond him at once. They told an old story, and the story was this: winter comes, winter goes, and in between people make themselves into more than the things that try to unmake them. In a world that had frozen and then cracked at last, that was enough.